The legends of Memphis Wrestling return to Jackson, Saturday, September 21st at the Picture Perfect Event Center. It will be a night to remember, featuring the stars you watched every Saturday morning on TV. Be there for the Fan Fest meet and greet at 3:30 and the official Memphis Wrestling Hall of Fame induction ceremony at 7 p.m. featuring Jerry the King Lawler, Superstar Bill Dundee, the Boogie Woogie Man, Handsome Jimmy Valiant, Dangerous Doug Gilbert, Wildfire Tommy Rich, the Rock and Roll Express, PG-13, Downtown Bruno, the Birdman Coco Beware, Dr. Tom Pritchard, the Dirty White Boy Tony Anthony, Nightmare Danny Davis, Terry Golden, Sir Mo, the Spellbinder, Tony Falk, Carl Fergie, Jerry Calhoun, Michael St. John, and more. Plus a special reunion of the stars from TV5 Power Pro Wrestling and KAW. The legends of Memphis Wrestling return to Jackson, Saturday, September 21st at the Picture Perfect Event Center. Sponsored by Budweiser, Pro Shingle, Thomas Media, Slide and Ride Rodeo, and WBBJ TV. Tickets are on sale now. Go to Eventbrite and search Official Memphis Wrestling Hall of Fame.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to episode 4 of Dangerous Conversations with Doug Gilbert. I'm your host, Gene Jackson, and it's my pleasure to welcome once again the man you came to hear, Dangerous Doug Gilbert. Doug, how we doing, man?
Man, Gene, I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. We're rolling right along. We're in our 4th week of the show, and I know we told everybody at the end of last week, for everybody who listened to the global episode, and thank you for all the great feedback we've been getting on it. I'm glad people enjoyed it. People said they learned a lot about the global organization that they weren't aware of. Have you gotten any feedback on that?
Yeah, I have, and I've had people say that to me also, and I'm glad. And to me, what we do this for, I'm glad. I hope people can learn some stuff that they haven't heard in the past or don't know. And yeah, it's been real positive feedback I've got, so I'm real happy with that.
Well, man, we sure appreciate everybody that's listening, everybody that's sharing and telling folks about it, because that's going to help us grow and help get more people listening. And we love the feedback. And any questions you have, be sure you send them to us, DougGilbertPodcast@outlook.com. I know at the end of that episode, we told everybody that this week we were going to be talking about Bill Watts, Universal Wrestling Federation, and that was our intent. But we've kind of called an audible today. We felt like today's episode would be better served to talk about something else today. Unfortunately, as most of you know by now, on Monday, a man that was, I know, a good friend of Doug's and Eddie's, and a guy I was a huge fan of. I follow his entire career. Big Sid Vicious, Sid Eudy, passed away, and we felt like we need to do an episode, Doug. He was close to you and your family, and let's talk about that.
Man, Gene, Sid, like I said, some weeks are a little tougher than others, and this week, like I said, it's been a tough one. And Sid is for sure and always will be a family friend. I mean, I've known Sid since I was a young man, and my brother knew Sid very well. Man, me and Sid traveled a lot together and everything. The first thing just right off the bat, I want to tell everybody, I hope they be praying for his family and kids and grandkids and everything. I mean, what people, a lot of things people didn't see was, Sid, as far as being a husband, father, grandfather, man, he loved his family and everything. And I mean, all what people see on TV, and that's what we want them to see, is they see Sid as a big giant monster, but not. I mean, he was a loving family guy and everything. And I mean, it's things like that. Like I said, it's like there's some weeks that's tougher than others, and like I said, it's been a tough one.
It doesn't get any easier. I know you've lost a lot of friends in this business and family, and over the years, and it never gets any easier. And I know that's the case. And one reason I wanted to do this episode with you, is for you to be able to share some stories of times you've spent with Sid and your brother. And But another thing is just to kind of get out there, 'cause something you just touched on, I think is a really good point, is Sid's a guy that a lot of people, they don't know about the man behind the character.
No. I mean, you hear a couple tales or a bunch of different tales, but you don't hear unless Sid wanted you to know him or about him. Nobody did, and I enjoyed, like I said, me and Sid was both kind of early birds, in which I get up in the morning about 4, and Sid did also, and he'd get ready to go to the gym, and I'd be getting up, going to work, or piddling with something, or getting ready to bush hog or something, and he would call, and or I would call him, and we was both sports fanatics, so we'd talk about a little sports, and we'd talk about just different business stuff and the real estate, and I mean, Sid was into a lot of different stuff that people didn't know about. I mean, he had contracting services with like bush hogging, like counties and stuff. I mean, he was into a lot of different things that it took him, as of being a businessman, that you'd have to be a businessman to do what he did and everything. But I mean, we'd talk about sports, we'd talk about the wrestling business a little bit, but I mean, football, baseball, basketball, and we'd always, the funniest thing, he'd call me during one of the games, and he'd say, "Are we going to bet?" And I'd say, "Yes, Sid, we'll bet." And it was always $1. We wasn't really betting. We was betting, but we wasn't betting. And it was a funny thing one time, because he told me, he said, somebody said something about betting. He said, "I'm not betting my money." So, I mean, but that was the thing. Said, "Well, are we going to bet?" And like, it's a big deal. And like, but we might bet on like 6 or 7 games, but it was always a week, $1 on each game. We never knew who was the winner, but it was just a cool thing. And like I said, that was one of my early morning. There's 2 or 3 guys that I talked to early in the morning like that, and he was one of them.
One thing that I find really unique about Sid, and it tells you a lot about him, is Sid married his wife Sabrina in December of 1983 and was still married to her to this day. A lot of wrestlers, man, they go through these marriages and they have a rough home life, but he married Sabrina in 1983. They had 2 sons, Frank and Gunnar. Some of you may know Frank from being a cast member on the CBS reality TV show Big Brother for a couple of seasons, and Gunnar dipped his toe in wrestling. And
yeah, Sid was real proud of that, the Big Brother deal, and he would talk, like when he was on the road, different people would ask him questions about that, but he was really proud of his sons.
And at the end of the day, having main evented WrestleManias and did all the things that Sid did in his life, I mean, at the end of the day, kind of like as you were just kind of talking about you guys' conversation, like he was just a country boy from Arkansas, right? I mean, he never got a big head. He was just Sid from West Memphis.
And he would, I mean, and if he liked you, he would tell you that. Or I mean, he didn't have to tell you knew, but I mean, that was just Sid. He didn't. I mean, here's the thing: Sid accomplished a whole lot. I mean, anybody can say what they want, which they do about all of us anyway. But I mean, Sid's. There ain't a whole lot of people made 200, 250 grand in a night wrestling, and Sid done very well financially. Like I said, he was a family man, still married, him and his wife. He loved his kids. Man, like one, which, after Sid had his injury, and I was just thinking about different things that went on. And I mean, we always stayed in touch, but I asked him one time, I said, he was talking about wrestling. I said, "Well, do you want to wrestle anymore?" And he said, I think so. And so that led into me and him talking, and his first match that he wrestled was, Gene, you probably know the date when he had his accident with his leg and everything. But the first match I could think about that he actually got back in the ring, me and a guy wrestled him and a guy, and I thought that was really cool and everything. But
yeah, because I mean, that was one of the most gruesome injuries in a wrestling ring. I can't think of one more hard to watch than the injury that Sid suffered at Starrcade that year with his leg breaking.
That's I tell people I don't want to see, which we're all different, and I don't see nothing like that. Like, it's just, that was an awful deal. But like I said, he stayed positive and come through it, and has had lived a good long time after that and everything. But that was one of the deals. One is a weekend, me and him traveled up to somewhere on the edge of Kentucky for some reason. I want to say Hazard or something, and we done an appearance at some kind of convention, and then we went the next night to and wrestled at HPW. That would have been in Columbus, Indiana, I think it would have been. And that's where I think the first time Sid got back in the ring since, his leg deal and everything. That's pretty special. I was just thinking of different things after people had called me the other day, but that's from starting of Sid's career. And Sid would tell you or if anyone spoke with him that, at the start of his career, my brother had a good opportunity to help him, and he did. And Sid always, thought a lot of that.
I've listened to pretty much any interview I could find over the years. I would always listen to if Sid was doing one, just try to learn something about the guy, and come to find out he had a podcast for a little bit that I didn't know about, that I recently discovered and had been listening to. And, he talked about on there, people always ask, how he got into the wrestling business, and he had a chance encounter with Randy Savage and Lanny Poffo.
In the gym.
In the gym. Imagine that. Most people's run-ins with Sid happen in the gym, right?
Sid told me, he said, they tell that story, and Sid said, they don't actually tell it right. And I started laughing, and I said, well, what is it? I didn't even know what the story was. You can tell I'm really up on things. And then he told me something about Lanny talking to him and looking at him, and something about, I forget what the deal about the shirt he had on, or Randy had on. I laughed because he said like the shirt was two sizes too small or something. I think that Randy had on, but they was looking at him, and they'd ask him, did he ever think about being on a pro wrestler or something? But Sid was funny. Said they was kind of strange, and I laughed at Sid for saying that and everything. But he was always, like I said, I think Sid, if you listen, well, this is the strange thing. He said to me about two months ago, he said, we need to start a podcast. I said, we need to start a what? Or maybe it's 3 months ago. And he was talking about him being on there and me being on it and us doing it together. And I said, shoot, Sid, I said, how would we do that or something? In which I thought, man, he's serious. And for about 2 weeks straight there, he was saying that. But he told me he had one, and he said he'd talk about music. So you've heard it. I've never listened to it, Gene, or anything, but he told me he'd go over like music. And I said, loved music. Yeah. And he had all the old albums, the big albums and everything. And we talked about music, but he loved music. But he told me he went over like on the podcast music stuff and different stuff that he liked. So did you say you've listened to one of the podcasts, or
I've heard a few of them. He's got they're like 20 to 30 minutes a piece. And for the first, I'm like 4 episodes into it. And those first few episodes, they kind of go through his, kind of walk through his career.
Right.
And then as you go on, he starts talking about music and other things. And they would work that into the first few episodes as well. And
I think the guy that was doing it with him, wasn't he from Canada maybe? It seemed like that's what he told me at one time or something. Or do you know who was?
This guy, like whoever he was talking to, this guy was like at his house the first couple episodes, which that guy may have come down if it's who I'm thinking of. I'm not sure. Well, it ain't who I'm thinking of because I would recognize his voice. But
right. Well, it seemed like he might have come and sit, because that was my question. I said, well, who would sit? I said, Mary, you'd have to have somebody to do this for us. And he said, I get a guy to set it up, and you just come to my house and we talk, which, and that would have been interesting. I mean, he'd have been funny to talk with about stuff. And like I said, Sid was really entertaining, and really what a lot of people wouldn't believe, he's quite funny. I mean, he had a good sense of humor.
It's funny, the first time me and you talked about getting this podcast going, when I first, pitched you the idea, and it's funny because you said, man, you'll never believe who actually was talking to me about wanting to do a podcast that we probably could get on here. And I said, who? And you said, Sid. And I was like, really? And you're like, yeah. And I was like, oh man, that would be great to have Sid on here. So that's something that, we had in the back of our mind that was something that was going to happen, eventually. And, I really hate that that's not going to happen.
Right.
But, he talked about in that interview, and I've heard him in shoot interviews, and I've heard him in a lot of places, because the guy was asking, he's like, hey, meeting Savage and Poffo led to you meeting Tojo Yamamoto, who trained him some. He has, we might have to share some links to that, because it's pretty fun to listen to Sid tell some of these stories. He talked about training with Tojo, and then Sid said he got into a skirmish down on Beale Street, non-wrestling related, just him and his buddies were down on Beale Street, and he got a little bit of a fight, and he broke his foot in the process. And he said he called Tojo up, and he's like, hey, man, I'm not going to be able to train this week. I broke my foot. And Tojo's like, you go to hell. You'll never come back again. You never come back again. He said, so that was when I was done with Tojo, I guess.
Right.
But he tells about meeting Lawler at a softball game, and eventually that leading to the tag team match that people point to as his first match, where he famously did Lord Humongous teaming with Austin Idol against Jerry Lawler and Nick Bockwinkel in the Mid-South Coliseum. I don't know if that was literally his first match, but it was certainly early on.
Oh, yeah, that had to be one of the – actually, I think Lawler had brought him in under just a black hood, like maybe a couple weeks before that, and wanted to see what he could do. And I think that was probably the first time, but he seen right then that he could do something with him, and he thought he had some talent. So that kind of helped progress things on, I think.
Well, I think anybody that laid eyes on Sid from the wrestling business knew, like, we got to do something with this guy. Like, I remember as a kid having those little He-Man action figures. I remember my mom telling me one time, she's like, those things are so silly. Nobody in real life looks like that. Sid Vicious looked like a He-Man action figure came to life.
Oh, he looked amazing. I mean, you put him beside anybody, and I mean, in the wrestling business during those days, and I mean, they might be as far as like your guys in the muscle contest or whatever, they might have been wider or whatever, but they'd been shorter, and they wouldn't have looked like Sid was put together from top to bottom. I mean, and he was, Sid was strong as a bear, and I mean, he could lift 1,000 pounds, it seemed like. And I mean,
but I mean, he had been working on a farm. He was an athlete, so like, it's not like he woke up one day and when he was in his 20s, like, hey, I'm gonna start working out to be a wrestler. No. Like, he had been, prone to being in shape his whole life.
And Sid was always, there's one thing about having muscles and then knowing how to use the muscles. But like you said, Sid was country strong. I mean, he worked as a kid, all through his adult life. And I mean, he, I don't know if you remember this, but we was talking about it first about being, like with his family and stuff. He used to bring Seth. It was, did you ever meet Seth on the road? He was a kid with Down syndrome and everything, and he would come to the Coliseum, and I met Seth a bunch, but Sid was so nice to him and took him around. He actually was on one of the what was it, the Nitro, the WCW, wasn't that Nitro, I think?
Yeah, I was going to say, I never met him, but I saw him on TV.
Is that right? Well, there you go. Yeah, he was a cool kid, which he's a grown adult man now, but I mean, he was cool, and Sid was always real nice to him and his family, still to this, last week spoke with him and everything, and I always thought that was really cool.
Yeah, definitely. And so you can speak to this. We're talking, since we were just talking about like the kind of shape Sid was in. You traveled with him a lot. You've known him for years. Tell people the regimen of like going to the gym and his diet and like how serious. Like, he didn't look like that by accident. Like you said, he was country strong, but he also worked at it every day of his life.
Oh yeah, his regular regimen was getting up, like I said, around 4:00. Going straight to the gym, working out, kind of loosen back up, go home, eat. I mean, he ate so clean also. I mean, not only as far as his training, but his eating and everything. He would go home, eat I say a big meal. What I mean, a lot of food, but food that's good for you.
Right.
He might take a nap. Then he would get up. He would go back to the gym. He would come back home. He would eat again. And then that night he would go back. His regular routine would have sunk most people. Like I said, his regular routine was 3 times on his regular stuff was 3 times a day. And now if he was on the road or something, he would make sure he got to train at least one good time. But I mean, I always, the way he looked like he did was he ate so clean, and I mean, he trained so much. I mean, he would train, eat, and that was his life. And if he was at home, he'd do that during the day. And at night, if he could go play softball, that was an extra treat for him. He loved his softball and everything, and that's I think that was the thing, just to get all the other stuff out of his mind.
Right. So, like I say, people have asked, well, hey, who do you credit for getting you in the business? And every interview from that podcast to every shoot interview, every interview I've heard, Sid would always say, and I actually wanted to try to get an audio clip of this, and I didn't get a chance to get it. Well, maybe I can put it in there later or put it up on the Facebook page. Sid has always said the man that he credits for giving him the opportunities that made him a star is Eddie Gilbert. Without fail, he has always said that. Yeah,
I heard him say that, and he said to me so many times, we'd be talking about different things, but he'd say the thing that he would never forget was him coming in. His wife's dad had a car lot, and my brother had called the car lot, had somebody give him that number for Sid, and he called there and left his name, and my brother did ask him, could he leave his number, and they said, yeah, and he left his name and number. And Sid told me, when I got in, I asked him, what's going on? And they said, well, this guy called for you. And he said, what guy? And they said, some guy named Eddie Gilbert. Do you know him? And he said, oh man, I was tickled to death. And then they give Sid his phone number, and he called Eddie, and he always told everybody that Eddie's the one that got him hired, and which it was funny because he'd been to Japan, and he told me stories, which is funny with me going to Japan so much, but he told me stories about him going over there and going a couple of weeks before the tour started, and how long it seemed like it was, and that they told him, that it would be a great money deal for his future, and it would be a great deal for him. And Eddie had asked him, he told Eddie what they told him, and Eddie said, well, are you happy in Japan? And he said, well, I'd rather be home. And I think Eddie wound up telling him, well, we can guarantee you things like $150,000 or something, and you be at home, or you can go to Japan and stay over there 20-something weeks a year. But it's up to you, whatever you want to do. But Eddie said, but I think if I was you, you can make a lot of money here in the States. So I would think that you should do that. And that's what he wound up doing. And like I said, seen the results from that. I think they turned out pretty well.
Oh yeah. I think he made the right decision, but I know I've heard it said, and I think Sid had said that when they brought him over to Japan, that they were working towards like making him the new Brody, or working towards the Brody spot.
That's what they told him. That's what they was going to do. And I mean, and I guarantee you he would have done well at that also. But like me and him, as far as talking, it's just after a little while over there, if you're kind of on the edge about things anyway, and then you're over there after you're there for a few weeks. And I think the first time he stayed like 6 weeks, and he come back and he had a good amount of money, and that was a good thing. That's what he went for. But it was being away for 6 weeks. It seemed a whole lot longer than that when you was over there and everything. And that's what, they had told him that's what they was going to do. And with his look and everything, on the first deal, they pushed him real big. And he wound up at one of the last nights, had a big match with, I think it was Inoki. And, but they was really going, they was really going to push him to the moon. Like I said, Eddie talked to him, and I think one good thing, and Sid really appreciated this because he told me a lot of times before that, Eddie put him in the right situation to learn and put him with the right guy as far as, Danny Spivey did know and everything. And that's what Sid told me, that Eddie said that I'm going to put you with Danny and, you be you, but I think you can learn a lot from Danny. Danny was really good. I mean, and everything. Danny had been to Japan and all around the world and worked with everybody also. And
yeah, absolutely. That pairing, I've heard him say a lot. Like you were just saying, that it was crucial to his development because he had this experienced guy. Because Dan Spivey had been in the business at that point, 10 years probably? 8?
Yeah, probably so. And he told me that, Danny wasn't shy by no means. He was, as far as, he was he was like Sid. He was he was a tough guy. I mean, he might not have had as many muscles as Sid did, but like I said, he was a smart fella and big, tough guy. And like I said, Sid, I think the good thing with that is Sid really respected him and everything, and watched him, and he really learned from him, I think.
Yeah, if you want to have some fun and see just how tough those two guys were, just go on YouTube and search skyscrapers and watch some of those poor enhancement guys. They had a tough time wrestling Sid and Danny Spivey.
I was fixing to say, they earned their money, didn't they?
They did, and I think a lot of people might have second guessed their career choice after some of those matches.
Yeah, and like I said, and man, both of, you watch those, but both of them guys, like I said, they was big and rough and tough and everything, but man, both of those guys, Sid and Danny, both super nice and believe it or not, laid back, cats.
But you know what people have told? People have said, and then Sid confirmed this in an interview, that, and this is, to me, this is a hell of a guy. Like, some of those guys and those one-on-one, like a couple of years later, say like around 89, 90, those guys would go out there, and take, Sid's choke slams and power bombs. The guys that made it look really good, guys like that Lee Scott, who's kind of famous for the bumps he'd take, Sid would go back there after the match and put a couple $100 in their hands, be like, "Thank you, man. I appreciate it." And, that ain't something he had to do. You know what I mean? Like, that's pretty cool.
Oh no! Like I said, Sid done a lot of stuff like that, but a lot of all that stuff you don't ever hear anything about. You just, that's the nature of our business in some aspect. Is you hear more, or I don't know. You've talked about, people want to hear bad, I guess, more than they want to hear good. It's not a big deal if somebody's kind of a good person or does good things. It's a bigger deal if they've done something bad at certain points. But Sid was really, really nice to a lot of people. Like the, the Eliminators here, when they come down to USWA and everything. I remember when they was leaving, Perry and John would go train and everything. And I remember Sid telling me one time, right when they was about to leave, one of them said to him, "Man, I need some money so when I get back home," and they got back up north, they would, have money to be on their feet. And I remember Sid had told me that he told, I'm sure it was Lawler then, said, just their last week here, which they had about 2 weeks left, said, "Just put them in a program with me." And I was looking at him when he told me this, and I said, "In a program with you?" And he said, "Yeah." And he said, I told him so they would make some money. And then he said he'd give them both a couple $100 each, but he'd give them money. He got them booked against him as in a handicap deal, just against him around the whole loop. But it was something that meant something. And so he got them a good payoff for the week, plus then he'd give them some money too. So, that's stuff like that that people don't hear about and everything. It's, the way some of us guys are.
Yeah, that's good to hear. Do you remember when you met Sid? Where and when?
That would have been Gene right after he had broke in the business here. That would have been that'd been the next year. When was it that him and I wrestled Lawler? You said what it
was in '87, I believe.
I think 80. It might have been 87 or the first of 88. I think.
Because in '88, I think probably around March, April is when he ended up in Continental.
Mm-hmm.
as Lord Humongous with Bruno and.
Yeah, I had met him in Memphis just before that, but as far as getting to know him real well myself, it was during the Continental days is when I really got to know him. And what was cool about, like I said, I was telling you about us all having an apartment. In that apartment there in Montgomery, Sid was one of the guys that lived, like I said, we stayed in hotel rooms, like 3 or 4 nights a week, but we'd split apartment and just keep an apartment in Montgomery. That's where the office was at for the Continental Territory. And Sid was one of the ones of us that would, split, and we had the apartment there, and that was really cool and everything. And that's when I really got to know Sid real well and traveled with him from then on a whole lot.
Hey guys, Ray Russell here, curator of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network, inviting you guys to listen to many of the programs here as part of the WrestleCopia brand, including, but not limited to, the Wrestling Memory Grenade, currently covering the 1988 and the WWF project. You can also listen to the Regional Wrestling Podcast, where we talk the territories, whether it's Jamie Ward with Georgia 81, Roman Gomez with the UWF in 1986, or Gene Jackson covering Memphis in 85. 3 projects going on right now over there at Regional Wrestling. You can also listen to the Wrestling Stoop with the legend himself, Bob Roop. Bob goes back in time each and every week, covering not just his career, but countless stories and interactions with hundreds of wrestling names spanning his 2 decades in the business. But that's not all. You can also check out the Puro Wrestling Academy with the professor of Puro Resu, Mr. Dan Ginnity. Dan and I go back in time and cover the history of Japanese professional wrestling in the English language. And you can listen to all of those shows and more, all part of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network, located over at WrestleCopia.com. That's WrestleCopia.com, and anywhere your podcast streaming needs are met, from Apple to Spotify, Pocket Cast, and beyond. And while you're at it, why not subscribe to our social media guys for all the latest goings on here at the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. Plus, I'm constantly adding old school video clips and pictures from throughout wrestling history. You can follow us over on X, formerly Twitter, at Wrestling Grenade. That's at RASSLIN Grenade. Also, follow and like me, Facebook.com/Wrestling Grenade. And why not subscribe to YouTube.com/Wrestling Grenade. So if you're looking to support that next up-and-coming podcast brand, please consider making it WrestleCopia.
Sid said in some of those interviews as well that really Continental was like the most fun he had in his career, even though he was just starting out and everything. He's like, but traveling with you guys and that apartment and, hanging out with Bruno and all that stuff that, he's had so many fond memories. It was just a lot of fun. Do you have any other fun stories from the Continental days?
Man, I think it was fun for him because it was being on the road and it was working and it was making a living for the first time in the wrestling business and seeing what it was like to actually be in the wrestling business. Because Sid would tell you that when he grew up, he watched wrestling, but he wasn't a big wrestling fan. Is right. The way he would put it to me, that, he was more, he told me, like you were saying about the farming and the work, he was more working and wasn't too much into very much stuff. He liked sports, but as far as when he watched wrestling, he liked wrestling, but he wasn't a big wrestling fan, which, some people are like that, or some people are like myself that grew up on wrestling and everything. But like I said, there's different things like, my brother put Shane Douglas with Sid and Continental, and that was kind of a cool deal with him as a tag team with Lord Humongous and Shane, and that was cool. And then there's just different things about down there. I think give him the opportunity as far as character-wise for the Lord Humongous gimmick to Sid himself, which he always told me. He said, one thing about the Lord Humongous, you couldn't make any facial expressions. So he said, everybody wonders why I try to make so many facial expressions now and everything. He said, well, when you was underneath the mask, you couldn't. He said, so now I think a lot of times I try to do too much as far as expression wise, which I always thought it was great how he done, pretty much everything that he done and everything. But it was that was a fun time in Continental. Like I said, I think it was good for him. And I think Eddie put him in a lot of spots to help himself, and I think he done real well with it.
Well, that's what I was going to say. I remember going to the Lavender Coliseum in Columbus and watching Lord Humongous against Nightmare Danny Davis. And of course, I was a big Nightmare Danny Davis fan. Eventually became a big Lord Humongous fan. And looking back now, knowing what I know now, that was another instance of Eddie taking care of him being so green and everything, because Danny, I mean, my goodness, you look at all the people Danny went on to train and the hand he's had in all these different careers. I'm sure it was no accident that his first feud in Continental was with Danny Davis, because he knew that Danny could work with him and he was learning on the job,
Well, and it's funny you say that. It was that. And I mean, after him and Danny, pretty quick after that, then I wound up working a program with Danny, because Danny was like the kind of, I think, the half training guy there. Every one of us that come through that was young, Danny worked a program with. But I mean, that was always good. I used to tell people, it was funny, like Bob Armstrong told me one time that he brought my dad in to get Scott going, Scott Armstrong, in which my dad worked a program with Scott for like 3 or 4 months straight and everything. Scott always talks to him about it. But Danny was great for that. And like I said, Sid worked the program with him, and Danny was so good. Like I said, all of us guys, I mean, he helped all of us out, but I mean, like I said, Sid was just really talented,
You mentioned Shane Douglas, and that was always kind of one of Eddie's guys. You could kind of tell when Eddie was booking somewhere, because you start seeing certain guys start popping up, and Shane was one of them. And I always liked that in Eddie's booking, he didn't just do like generic wrestling angles and just the same old things that people did. It was really fun the way that Lord Humongous turned a babyface with Shane, where turns out Shane's like his cousin, and there was this slow burn over a few weeks' time, where it all transpired. And and again, putting him in a tag team there, as he would later with Spivey, even though Shane Douglas wasn't real experienced himself, but it gave him a chance to, tag out and Shane to take the heat.
But Shane was such a pure baby face, and then you got the Lord Humongous gimmick, which like I said, we always talk about, with your face completely covered, it's hard for you to get any sympathy on it, which is really hard to get sympathy when you're as big and looked like Sid did also. But what I'm saying, it was a good pairing as far as, because like I said, you had Shane that I mean, the people would get behind and they'd give that hot tag to Sid, and people would go nuts. And like I said, Sid would do all his stuff. And I mean, he was super over down there.
He was. I remember. So I tell you how you get sympathy on a 6'9" monster in a hockey mask. You have Randy Colley throw ink in his eyes and blind him.
That done it, didn't it?
It did. I remember he disappeared for a couple of weeks, and Randy Colley was Detroit Demolition, and the DI Bob Carter, Bob Blackburn.
Yeah. Right.
Those guys were in a match, and somebody brought a gift wrap package to ringside, and when they opened up the package, I think Bruno was down there too. Bruno opens the package. They pull out a ink-stained hockey mask, and all of a sudden War Machine by Kiss starts playing. And all he did was come down the aisle and just stalk them around the ring like Jason Voorhees or something. And they ran for their lives, and people went nuts. And he was made like he was, I mean, like I said, between that and paired up with Shane, he was off to the races as one of the top baby faces there in Continental.
He was. And I mean, he was over. I mean, which Eddie had different stuff for him to do on TV. And like you said, as far as, just kind of personalizing you'd think it'd be hard to personalize a kind of humongous something with him, but there was quite a few different things that Eddie done with him that I don't think people had done before and everything. And I think the one good thing is that, like I said, Eddie and Sid was friends. And I think, Sid would listen to Eddie, and Eddie could tell him what he thought and what he thought was right. And 99% of the time Sid would go along and get everything over that Eddie told him.
Something I always thought was a cool thing, and Bruno's told this a lot, and maybe someday we can get Bruno on here and let him tell some of his experiences with Sid as well. But I know I've heard Bruno tell several times that, those two traveled together in Continental and Memphis and different places, got to be really great friends. And Sid always told Bruno, he said, if I make it up to the WWF, I'm going to get you a job. I'm going to get you up there. And he made good on that. Sid made it to the WWF, and eventually Harvey Whippleman was there by his side and was his manager, and had a long – I mean, Bruno worked there for years and years and years after that.
Yeah, and I mean, Sid did get him the tryout, but I mean, after that, Bruno had to keep his job himself, and and everything. But but I mean, yes, I mean, his word. If he told you something, he was going to do it. And I mean, somebody would have had to told him something wrong if it wasn't the truth, whatever he told you. And I mean, it was just like I said, there's so many different things. I mean, like I said, as far as traveling and just traveling here, working in the Memphis territory, we had a bunch of good times in here. And I mean, it was cool. Me and him went to New Orleans for a WrestleCon. I guess we went for the same guy, but we hung out there for a weekend, and that was really cool. We had a good time. We went to New York together to some signings and different things, and we went to Philly to, I think, a WrestleCon up there, and that was really cool. But I mean, heck, I've traveled kind of all over with Sid and had some great times and great memories. And you mentioned Bruno earlier, and I talked to him earlier in the week, and I told him, I said, probably Bruno and myself probably about traveled with Sid as much or more than anybody. And I said, we've been in some spots, haven't we, Bruno? And he said, yeah. And we kind of reminisced a little bit.
Yeah. So, Sid went on, like I say, he came up through Memphis and Continental. He went to WCW, and he headlined the Starrcade. He feuded with Sting, teamed with Big Van Vader, and then eventually went on to headline a couple of WrestleManias. He was multiple-time world champion across WWF, WCW, the USWA. But throughout all that time and, all these worldwide promotions and pay-per-views, and he headlined, he would always find his way back to Memphis, and it was more so just about being back home, right? So he could be there close to his family.
Well, you know what, that's the strange thing, Gene. People will not at different times why he done something for, but I'll be dang if I don't think every time that he wanted to go home and he went, if he didn't wind up walking back in a better spot than he did when he left. And that was hard because he was always in good spots. But I mean, he's the only person that I can think of right now. And somebody might tell me and you that I'm wrong after I say this, but was sitting there with a $750,000 or $1 million contract waiting for him to sign, and from WCW, and Vince and them wanted him back, and they talked him out of signing that, and he signed with Vince and everything. But I mean, and then he told me that the idea thing would have for him to took the contract, but he wanted to go because they made him so many promises and everything, and he thought that was the route to go. And we all got to do what we, it's like, Gene, if somebody told you something, 2 or 3 different companies told you something, and you'd wind up picking the one that you thought, that you wanted or what you thought would be best for you. And he told me in that instance, during that time, though, he said he probably did the wrong thing. But there's not that many people that you're going to be able to talk to that's has looked at that. It has looked at $750,000 million guaranteed laying on the table and not took it. And right. then, like I said, there's not too many people that I know a bunch of people in the wrestling business and a bunch of wrestlers, a bunch of promoters, and a bunch of everything else, but I don't know that many that's made $250,000 in one night. And he did. Oh. So what I'm saying is it don't matter. People can knock whatever or say, well, he didn't stay here, he left here or went there. Man, that during that time, as long as he was happy with what he was doing, that was the right thing. And I mean, that's, you got to respect people for doing what they want to do.
And I assume maybe you can confirm or tell me if I'm wrong, but I feel like all of Sid's decisions like that were always it was never about ego and who's going to make me look the bigger star. It was always just what he thought was going to be best for his family in the long run, right? It was about where he could make the most money and do the most good for his career. It wasn't about like, oh, they're going to push me, I'm going to be the top star. It was just about what was best for them.
Right. It was what was best and what he thought was best for the future. And I mean, it was, one of the main things. 99% of the people like leading up to WrestleMania would have been saying, well, what are we going to do after WrestleMania? Well, to the WrestleMania that he worked against Hogan in the main event, was that 8 or 9, I think, or something?
8.
Does that sound right?
Yeah, and Indianapolis.
Yeah, he told me he was so ready to go before WrestleMania that he had the 3 months before that, the build up. He said it just seemed like it took forever, and he could not wait for that night to come and get over with. And I said, what do you mean, man? I said, people would. He said, Doug, it was just so crazy. We was never getting to go home. He said, I told him a couple months before that I was just fixing to leave, and they said, no, at least make it through Mania. So he told me he kind of promised him that he would.
Yeah.
He did, and quick after that, though, I think he was out of there.
Yes, he was.
But
He
see,
was.
that's what the people they looked at and say, well, why did this happen or why did that happen? And he told me that they was lucky that he stayed that long. But I mean, most people would cut one of their arms off for that opportunity. But it was just it was at the point where he said that he was just going to have to get away and everything. And like I said, if you listen to somebody and you hear like I did, you understand. I mean, it's not which I knew how to take most things with Sid and everything. And like I said, Sid at a breaking point when he got to it, like that deal, he'd leave for a little bit. But like I said, I swear, people can knock it or whatever, but then when you're gone 6 months to a year and all of a sudden they want you back and then they're offering huge money again, I don't think you've really hurt yourself, and you give your body a break. And the whole time that he wasn't actually working, he was still training and working out. I mean, he stayed in shape. So, that part wasn't hurting him by no means.
I mean, that was the thing. I mean, people could get upset, and Vince McMahon could probably be mad that he couldn't control Sid and like he could other people. But the bottom line was, you weren't going to pull another Sid just out of anywhere. Like 6 months, 8 months later, when he decided to come back, he's still 6'9". He's still a monster. He still draws money. People still want to see him, and you can't just pull that out of Ohio Valley or wherever you're trying to pull talent from.
And I'm going to tell you, I mean, he drew money everywhere. But, Gene, if you would have been with him like I was up in the Northeast area, oh, my gosh, those people in New York, Baltimore, Philadelphia, I mean, anywhere up that way, gosh, we'd wrestle at small colleges or big high schools and draw 3,000 or 4,000 people, and just with like Sid, and I'd work against Sid, and they'd have like 5 or 6 other matches. But I mean, they might be one other guy that had come off of WWF TV, or might not be no guys that come off. And I mean, they draw 3,000 or 4,000, and it would be like your miniature little WWF crowd. But I mean, they would go wild when Sid would come out and everything. And I thought, gosh, this guy, which I knew he was over, but I mean, those nights in the standing ring, and they'd hit his music and stuff, and he'd come out. I thought, man, this dude is so over. I mean, it was like a different type of over, if you can imagine that.
Yeah, I mean, if you're listening to this, if you want to go look at, I think it's Survivor Series 96, where Sid's wrestling Shawn Michaels for the title, and Sid's supposed to be the heel, and Shawn's at the peak of his babyface run. And in New York City, they were all about Sid in that match. Like, they turned on Shawn Michaels.
Was that where that's where Sid did the promo? Wasn't they both that do promos? And Sid said, "You might be the champion, but you're dealing in a big man sport," or something. I can't remember Sid's actual line, but he said that. But I mean, the people I thought, man, which I watched back after he told me a couple of things that they went back and forth and said, and I thought, that's cool. I mean, it's kind of, at least they was doing their own stuff, whether, anybody likes it or not. It wasn't wrote out for them or nothing. They was kind of saying and kind of shooting on the square, ribbon on the square a little bit, but I mean, saying what they actually both thought and everything.
Yeah. I thought that was so cool. It was kind of like what you said. It just was an illustration of just how over he was in the North, even though he was a Southern boy and his career started and kicked off in the South. he became a monster star in the North, for his entire career.
Oh yeah, they loved him. Like I said, we'd go do signings and stuff, and they was just crazy about him, which I'm not saying about the South. He drew a bunch of money in the South, and everywhere else he went to, it was just like he was a freaking celebrity figure up there in the Northeast.
And it was really cool for the USWA because here you've got, this guy who he's just a few months away from, he just recently had been in the ring with Hogan at WrestleMania. Then later he had just been feuding with Shawn Michaels on TV. And now he is wrestling Lawler for the unified title around the horn. He's not just at the Mid-South Coliseum. He's going to the towns. And that was a huge shot in the arm for Memphis. And, of course, helped make money for all you guys there. So I'm sure everybody appreciated that.
And here's the thing, what people don't really realize, Gene, about that is every time he would go back for one of his major runs, in which, you could pick, I guess, between them and say, but to me, they was all good runs because, every time he went back, I think he done well. But before he would go back, every time he would at least come here, usually at least 2 to 4 weeks. And like you said, make the loop. Man was in some tag matches together, and I saw one. We was talking about him working against the Eliminators on the loop, but then me and him worked some tags against him, and that was cool. And like I said, he would always, before he ever went back, he'd come back and just wanted to kind of tune up, and for about a month, usually a month, 6 weeks, and it didn't matter if it was WWF, WCW, where it was, he'd come back and, get his legs back under him, and then there he'd go again and do well. And it's a funny thing because he told me one time, said, somebody told me I would be thankful for the Ultimate Warrior. I said, and I'm thinking, why would they tell him that for? And I laughed when he told me. He said, because they said every time he would leave, Vince would call me. And, but, I didn't, I was more into our product at the time and watching us work and not that product, but I guess you would probably know what he's saying there. But he said they had the big, like the entrances were the main 4 or 5 guys, like Shawn and Undertaker and them had their great entrances, which he said they had one made for the Ultimate Warrior, and they wound up changing it a little bit and putting Sid across there. But it was one of those times when the Ultimate Warrior and Vince had got into it, and Sid said, "You see this?" And he said, "I don't even know what it was. It's just a big thing of lights." But he said, "Then you see a SID in the middle of it," and I popped one time. Me and him was looking at something, and I saw it. And he said, "That's what I'm talking about right there." He said, "Look, don't tell him how much money they paid for it for him." And then he quit, and then they called me, and I come in, and they just put Sid in the middle of it, and I got over me. I popped. That's funny.
Folks, if you look around online, you'll find that picture of Sid standing in the ring with that big sign that Doug's talking about. And if you look at it, you can tell where they took an Ultimate Warrior sign logo and split it and made it into the words SID.
But is that not?
That's dead on. But yes, there are several instances where Warrior just flaked out on them, and suddenly Sid shows back up. So I just imagine Sid sitting at home in Arkansas. Vince calls and has to throw, because at that point Sid's got all the leverage. So I'm sure he brokered some pretty sweet deals.
Well, he told me
to come back up there.
Well, that's what he told me. They flew for I think it was a Baltimore show. They flew their jet down here to get him, and they got him on the phone and just asked him would he at least do that one night. And they made a deal with him for that one night, but told him they wanted to sit down with him when he got there. And they flew their jet down here to Memphis and picked him up and flew him there to the show. And then, so I didn't get into specifics on a lot of the money stuff he told me, but I didn't tell him what that deal was. And I guarantee you it was huge, because like I said, they had to have him. And that was the only thing you got to realize, Gene, when you're the good deal about Sid replacing somebody, I don't care whether anybody says the Ultimate Warrior couldn't work or whatever. He was over like $1 million up there, way was up there.
Yeah.
So for you to have a person that when you hit the music or when the person just comes out, it's above that, then you've got something, and that means something. And that's the spot that Sid had with him. So he had the leverage right there, and that really helped in a lot of ways. And it's like he told me, though, he said he sat home one time, and he said he thought he might have got paid more for that WrestleMania than what he did, but he didn't ever really say that to anybody. But he said he sat home one time for 18 months and never missed a check, which, I hear people telling stories about not getting checks and everything, but he said he sat home and didn't miss a check for 18 months and got one like every 2 weeks or something. So, I mean, I'd say that's a sweet deal, which, I mean, I know you've heard him before saying about like what Sean not working for 4 years and Vince not ever, not ever not paying him, just keeping on paying him. I think it was 4 years or something, but I always thought, people didn't really know that, which, I mean, and I think, all the guys think they should make a little more, but I mean, Sid done real well with them.
And he's a guy who made a ton of money in his career, but he didn't live an extravagant lifestyle, right? I mean, he wasn't blowing that money, and that's why he could call his own shots, because he wasn't in a position where it's like, all right, this money's running low. I guess I'm gonna have to try to get back in there. I mean, he didn't blow it and live like how some people do, like a Ric Flair.
Right. He told me one of the guys that come through Memphis during one of his times coming back, but when he was here, the guy didn't have much money or anything. Sid said he went back to WWF, and he said the guy come up to him and said he just had on a T-shirt, like Carhartt T-shirt or something. Sid did, and said the guy walked by him and said, "Sid, why don't you get one of these shirts?" And I was laughing because him saying that to me about clothes, it was funny. He said, I looked at him and said, "One of those shirts? Why do I want one of these shirts? One of those shirts for?" He said, "These cost $400. Why hadn't you got one on?" And Sid said, "Because I still got my $400 in my pockets. Why I don't have one on?" And I'm going to be wearing. But Sid was on top during those. When he's talking, this guy, and I thought, that guy just kept his mouth shut and left well enough alone. But I mean, like I said, Sid knew business and money, and I mean, people think once someone has left that maybe they're not doing well. But I think that was right the opposite with Sid. I think he was always doing well when people, they wouldn't see him. But I mean, you got to realize how good he done during all those runs. And I mean, then he went home. Sid was a smart guy. He got with like one of those chemical companies, farming companies, and they paid him to go talk with people also, which a guy just the other day had talked to me about that, about knowing Sid from Dyersburg, Tennessee, and him coming over there talking to him about farming stuff and everything. But Sid knew he knew a lot of stuff.
Yeah, see, my dad used to sell farm equipment, right. And he called me one time, and he was at like a farm show, and he's like, "You're never going to believe who I saw at the agriculture show this weekend who was up there talking." He's like, he was representing a chemical company. I'm like, "Who?" He said, "Sid Vicious." I'm like, "Sid Vicious?" He's like, "Yeah." He's like, he works for this company, and he goes around talking. And I was like,
and another guy, do you remember a guy that kind of resembled Sid? I mean, size-wise, his name, he wrestled as Johnny Rotten.
Johnny Rotten, I do.
That's Sid's buddy, which he passed a few years ago and everything, but he was a great fellow too. And I traveled some with him, like when Sid was in WWF and he wanted to wrestle around here, they'd book him and I'd ride with him. He'd ride with me, and he was a good guy too. But he was with one of those companies that you're talking about. Like they'd go and talk with people and everything. And, they really done well with that.
Well, that's cool. Well, given Sid's career that he's had, I really wish that he would have been put into the WWE Hall of Fame while he was still here to be a part of it. I know online that, there were Twitter accounts and different things that were posting that up, and it was, supposedly coming from Sid. I can't picture Sid tweeting.
Oh, that's a guy. That's a guy in California, I think he told me, but he'd get hot because the funny thing, like some of his friends was calling him, like getting hot at him. I don't know what you said. You said I had never seen it before, but the guy would be tweeting stuff. Well, somebody that knew Sid was calling him saying, "I can't believe you're saying that." Sid, "What do you mean I'm saying what?" Sid didn't know what they was talking about, and then he wound up telling me, I think he found out the guy that was doing it is maybe from California or something, which you might know, Gene. I'm not sure. But he said he wound up talking to the person one time and said, "Man, don't say stuff like you're saying," which I thought, I don't guess with the name, the way the guy had it, he could say anything about it or whatever. But he said he wound up, I think, talking to the guy.
Was that something that was important to Sid? Like a Hall of Fame or something like that? Is that something I mean, nobody's gonna be mad at getting in the Hall of Fame, obviously, but I mean, is that something that would have meant a lot to him or not?
Man, I think so. The last 3 or 4 years, I think it would have meant a lot. I mean, I really do. I mean, it didn't hurt nothing that it didn't happen because he knows what he'd done and he had a great career and everything. But I think it would have really. Now, before that, I don't know, but I think this last 3 or 4 years, I think it would have meant a lot to him.
So let's talk about. So Sid has been battling cancer for a while now, and that's not something that was public knowledge, and that was intentional. Sid didn't want that out, which again I think says a lot for him as well. Only his closest friends and family really had knowledge of it. When do you remember finding out that news, and how was Sid taking it?
Oh, it's probably been two years, a little over. I mean, it hadn't just been, it hadn't just been the last little bit or anything. I mean,
Right.
He's been struggling for a while, but he wouldn't say struggling. He's still going to the gym and training, and he took up boxing of all things. Me and him, one of the last signings we went to, a guy gave me and him, he gave us each a glove, give me the left one and Sid the right one. But remember Larry Holmes, the boxer, the world champion, Larry Holmes?
Absolutely.
Larry Holmes had signed one of them, and we signed in a couple of pictures. And the guy gave us, he had Larry Holmes had autographed both gloves, and he gave us, and I said, well, Sid, you can have both of them and take them, because I knew which, like, boxing. Me and him was talking about boxing, and he was showing me different punches. He said, Doug, you know how many really punches they are, what they call real punches in boxing? I said, I don't know. Said 2, and he said, no, 6. And he was showing me the punches and the different stuff, and he really enjoyed that. But he had been into that the last year, so I mean, he never quit training. Yeah, Sid loved boxing. I mean, as far as his we'd be traveling, like the last few times we traveled, we'd still talk about sports, but boxing had been a real big thing. And like I said, he was going to a gym over there in Memphis, and it was like a boxing, like they had all the bags, the punching bags that you punched and everything. And he said, like, a lot of the new and young up and comers would go there and everything. And one of them asked him one time, so the guy that owned the gym said, do you know who you're training with right there? And the guy told Sid, said, tell him who you are. He said, nah, I had never done much. Said, I was on the Family Feud. And the guy laughed because he was, remember, WCW. And the guy told him, said, man, you was on the Family Feud? And Sid said, yeah. And he said, what'd you win? And Sid said, I won a lot. And he said, what are the money? He said, what'd you do with that money? He said, I give it to charity, which, all the guys that did the celebrity, the Family Feud deals, they, whatever they do when they give it to charity. And he said, the guy said, oh, man, said, well, you got to be pretty cool then. Well, later on during that day, this guy walked back up to him. The guy that owned the gym told him who Sid was. He didn't know. And he said, man, you Sid Vicious. Said, man, I watched you when I was a kid. And which he said went on to, Sid laughed and told me that was funny, the stories and everything. But like I said, Gene, the main thing, and I mean, I know we went over some stories, but I tell everybody that, appreciate them praying for Sid's family and kids and grandkids. And, like I said, Sid was always a real good guy like I said, that Seth, he was a great kid growing up, and Sid was always good to him. And I mean, Sid went to like the shelters, and, he talked with homeless people, and, all that stuff has never been noticed. And Sid didn't want it noticed or anything. I mean, he wouldn't even go out and tell people when he done good things. Like me and you was talking. I mean, I don't know what we want to just talk about bad things, but a lot of times people thinks bad things are more interesting than good things.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely the trend in society, not just the wrestling business, but just society in general and social media. People like to talk about the bad and dwell on the bad. But man, I've been really happy on social media the last couple of days. I don't know if you've been on and really noticed it, but there's been a lot of great positive stuff shared about Sid. A lot of pictures of him with his grandkids and people coming out of the woodwork telling stories, guys in the business like Booker T, saying how, him and his brother never would have gotten their opportunity in WCW if Sid hadn't helped them, and cool stuff like that.
Well, I'm glad you said that, because I was going to say, Sid, like Eddie called Sid got those guys a start and everything, and they done well for themselves. I mean, he got them a start. And like I said, I mean, he got Bruno to try out. Bruno had to keep his job himself, but he did get Bruno to try out. So that's cool. It's cool when people help other people and everything. Like I said, Eddie was one of Sid's influences, and I'm like I said, Eddie got along with Sid real well, and I did too. And like I said, I mean, Sid traveled everywhere together, and we had a bunch of good times.
And he's one of those guys that forever in the sport will be, his name is synonymous. He's made a big enough name for himself that he's one of the few guys that all you have to do is say the name Sid, and people know exactly who you're talking about. You don't have to say a last name. You don't have to add the psycho or that. If somebody just says, "Hey man, remember Sid?" They know exactly who you're talking about if they're a wrestling fan, and I think that's pretty cool too.
Oh, I think it's really cool. That's why I always told him I didn't even think you didn't need the vicious, you didn't need the psycho. All he ever needed was just Sid. I mean, that was it. Just Sid. I mean, that's like I said, you would have just been shocked if you'd been with me in some of the places. Like, I've seen the most over guys that they are, and like I said, in that Northeast, gosh, he was one of them. Like I said, I'd be standing in the ring and him coming out to the ring, it'd just be, I mean, you had to be there to been around. I've been in some big arenas, sold slap out full, and the electricity in them, and like I said, up there in the Northeast with him, just wherever it was at, it was like that.
Really cool, man. Well, we appreciate you coming out here and talking about your friend. I know it's tough to do in the wake of losing him, and like I said, it doesn't get easier, man. I know you've lost a lot of friends and even family in this business over the years, and it's hard to deal with it. And I just wanted to be able to come on here and give you a chance to share some of these stories that people don't necessarily know about Sid.
You know what I'm going to say, Gene, and we can end on this is man, I'm just going to think of the good stuff that the memories that I have, the good memories I have of Sid, and think positive about them. And like I said, the main things I appreciate everybody listening. Like I said, I want everybody that is listening, if they would pray for Sid's family and kids, grandkids, and everything. And he'll be in heaven looking down. And but anyway, I appreciate everybody for listening to me. And like I said, some weeks are going to be longer than others, and we all have things that happen that we'd rather not. But anyway, we're all going to pull through everything. And like me and you've talked before, I appreciate everybody listening to us, and I hope we give you some kind of little bit of knowledge. It'd probably be Gene more than myself giving you the knowledge, but we give you a little bit more than you need before you start listening to us. But like I said, we appreciate everybody listening, and peace. Everybody be cool.
Hey, folks, before we get out of here, I just want to take a moment to remind you to check out DougGilbertPodcast.com. There you can find links to all things related to this podcast and to Doug himself. There are links to the Dangerous Conversation Facebook page, where we post all sorts of great content regularly involving the Gilbert family. There's the Dangerous Conversations X/Twitter that we have. Plus, there's a link to the Dangerous Doug Gilbert Facebook and X pages, where you can keep up with everything Doug has coming up, like shows, signings, conventions, you name it, and it's all going to be posted right there by Doug on his social media. He appreciates the support, and if you really want to show support, check out the Gilbert Family Pro Wrestling Tees store, featuring a tremendous array of T-shirts featuring Doug, Eddie, and their father, Tommy Gilbert. And if you've enjoyed listening to this show, please subscribe, rate, and review the show on whatever your platform of choice is. It really helps us out, and it helps us build the podcast for the future. And if you want to see a plethora of matches, promos, and angles involving Doug and Eddie and Tommy, you can check out the Gilbert Family playlist on our YouTube channel over at youtube.com/@RetroWrestlingArchive. But that link is available at DougGilbertPodcast.com. And last but certainly not least, we are proud to be a part of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. Go on over to WrestleCopia.com and check out all the great wrestling-related podcasts and content that our friend Ray Russell provides for you over there. You'll certainly be glad that you did. Hey everybody, Gene Jackson here, inviting you to check out the Retro Wrestling Review, where each week I'm joined by some great co-hosts who help me review classic episodes of USWA Championship Wrestling, and right now we are doing week-by-week reviews of 1993. But we don't just do reviews, sometimes we get a chance to interview some of the people who were there and lived it, plus do watch-alongs. It's a lot of fun, so check out new episodes that drop every Wednesday at WrestleCopia.com. And to find links to everything associated to the podcast, you can go to USWApodcast.com.